Hi everyone. Today we're going to be exploring the topic of diet and cancer. And I know that it's a hugely emotive subject for a lot of people. Either you know somebody who has got cancer or has had cancer, or you're just worried yourself about the risk of getting cancer and what you can do about reducing that risk. So I'm really excited today to talk to Jo Cunningham, who is an expert dietitian in this space around diet and cancer, so that we can do a little bit of myth busting and address some of the frequently answered questions or frequently asked questions. Jo, really lovely. Thank you so much for coming to chat to me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sasha. It's really nice to be here. It's something that I'm really passionate about, so I'm keen to get started.
Awesome. I would love it if you could start with a little bit of an intro about yourself and your experience in this space.
Yep, sure. So I'm a registered dietitian, and like many dietitians, I started my life off in the NHS. Wide rotation of different sort of areas that I specialised in and had experience in. Very quickly knew that I was passionate about oncology. Wasn't sure whether I was going to specialise in oncology or gastroenterology. I actually now do a bit of both. After leaving the NHS, I went to Harley Street to work in a private cancer hospital, and that was absolutely amazing experience. Made some really good friends. Had saw a wide range of different cancers and supported lots of different people there. I left there just before the pandemic actually, and now run my own clinic, Greenlight Nutrition, where I see cancer patients as well as those experiencing digestive disorders. I'm also on the clinical advisory committee for a company called Percy Health, which is an online platform which has a mission of bridging the gap between cancer and wellness by providing high quality cancer experts from a whole range of different kind of fields. So you've got things like dietitians on there, you've got menopause specialists, counsellors, physiotherapists. It's a wonderful platform that I'm pleased to be involved with.
Oh, amazing. And what incredible experience. We're so lucky to be able to talk to you today. Before I kick off with some of the questions that I'd love to ask, could you maybe tell everybody a little bit about what a dietitian is? And, I guess not everybody can call themselves a dietitian. What's the difference between other nutritional practitioners and, why is there a specific title of dietitian?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, when we're thinking about the key difference between dietitians and nutritionists, dietitian is a protected title, which means we are very strictly regulated, and we are bound by a strict code of conduct and ethics. And we are considered the gold standard when it comes to nutrition care. So unfortunately, while there are wonderful nutritionists and nutritional therapists out there, it's not quite as tightly regulated, and some people could do a 2-hour course and call themselves nutritionists. So making sure that you're finding the right information from the right professional is sometimes quite tricky. If you're seeing a registered dietitian, you know that you can trust them because they have got that very strict training. We have some clinical experience that we have to do obviously in a hospital setting, sometimes in the community setting, and really we are able to work with sick people, unwell people in that hospital setting, and that is one of the main differences.
Yeah, and probably a really pertinent point to underline when we're talking about cancer, because of course that's often what's treated in a hospital setting with some very strict clinical guidelines based on all the evidence that's out there on how you manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that I'll talk about probably in a moment as well is people like nutritional therapists and nutritionists, because they haven't got that clinical experience in the cancer hospital setting, they, with the best will of the world, they might be recommending lots of different supplements that are potentially interacting with some of the medications that people are on. So that's something that I talk to my clients about in clinic.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, we'd love to address that a little bit more later on. So let's start looking at some foods. Are there any foods that we should be eating more of or less of that would help us cut the risk of getting cancer, full stop?
Absolutely, and it's really well timed because it's World Cancer Day this coming weekend on the 4th of February, and I just did a post on this last night actually. Things we should be eating more of, so plants. it's in the headlines a lot at the moment that we need to be eating more plants. And when we're talking about plants and why, I think that's probably the most important thing. So we've got our fruits and our vegetables, which most of us would automatically think of as a plant, but we also have our whole grains, our nuts and our seeds, and our legumes, so things like our chickpeas and lentils and beans, as well as our herbs and spices. All of them are plants, and they have wonderful plant-based chemicals which are shown to be beneficial to our body. When the fibre in those plants reaches our large intestine, where trillions of microbes live, beneficial gases are produced when those microbes are fermenting on the food, and they have been associated in terms of cancer protection. So specifically, there's a beneficial byproduct called butyrate, which has been associated with reducing the risk of colorectal cancer, for example. So more plants, it doesn't have to, we don't have to worry so much about the portion size. It's just about that variety across the week. An amazing study by the American Gut Project a few years ago found that people who have 30 or more plants per week versus those who have 10 had a wider variety in their gut microbiome in terms of the diversity of the bacteria. So really, we don't have to stop at 30. You may have heard about the 30, but really aim for as many different plants as you can is the take home here. It doesn't mean to say we have to be completely vegan. We can still include meat and oily fish and other fish and seafood in our diet as well, but really making sure that we're getting loads of plants in. So that's my top tip for what to include. In terms of things to eat less of, so I really don't like the word avoid, but I'm going to say the word avoid here because we do have some good evidence that these foods are harmful to us when we're thinking about reducing risk of cancer. So ultra processed foods is the biggest one, I think, at the moment. So when we're saying ultra processed foods, we're thinking about those sort of convenience foods, the ones that might be high in sugar, fat and salt, and which often contain things like additives, preservatives, colorings and flavor enhancers. So this might be some of those shop bought cakes, it might be some of the mass produced bread, it might be things like some sausages or sausage rolls and things like that as well. So ultra processed foods, really we want to be just cooking our foods from scratch where possible. Other things to avoid or at least have less of are processed meats. So we've got things like our hams, our salami, our bacon, our sausages. There's a strong link between increased risk of different types of cancers with the high consumption of those foods. I would say when it comes to sort of processed meats and ultra processed foods, a little bit every now and then, if you've got lots of plants in your diet, is more than likely okay. So I don't want, if you're at a party, for example, and that's the only thing that's on offer, I would rather that you eat something rather than avoid it completely. But ideally, let's not stock our cupboards with loads of those things. And then the last thing in terms of what to have less of is going to be alcohol. So we know that when we drink alcohol, it gets converted in our body to a chemical that does damage to our body and increases the risk of various different types of cancers. So ideally, I know the government recommendations are 14 units per week. I would try to half that if you can, and at least aim for 3 days per week that are alcohol free.
Wow, well, that's going to be amazingly good news for anybody who just did dry January, and they should bear that in mind as they move into February. But yeah, astounding when you're talking about ultra processed food. I was in the Nutrition Society conference last week, and the data that 60% of what we're eating in the UK is ultra processed food. It's what's on all the shelves in the supermarket. It's almost, it's quite a difficult battle that we've got to fight to get our diets back on track and in the right direction.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was quite that high, 60%. That is incredible. And I think part of what I do in my clinic is talking to people about how you don't have to cook loads in order to actually have a food that is less, got less of these ultra processed foods in. Sometimes simple things actually take just as long as putting some chicken nuggets in the oven. So.
And as you said, as you sort of touched on with all the plant-based foods, with ultra processed foods, it's not just what's been added in, but it's also what's been taken out, which is the fiber, which is, what is so beneficial, I think, when we're eating all these plant-based foods. Thanks, Jo. So takeaway headline is more plants, less processed foods, and less alcohol. there've been lots of headlines about bacon, and I know that you've just touched about bacon, but also about burnt toast and that they're bad for us. What does the science say on these?
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about burnt toast, we're mainly thinking about a chemical called acrylamide. So it's a chemical that's found within starchy foods like bread and like potatoes, and if they're cooked at high temperatures for a long time. So that might include baking, barbecuing, frying, grilling, toasting or roasting. It is also found in some baked foods like biscuits, and it can be found in coffee as well. Now, when we're thinking about acrylamide, good quality studies have not shown that acrylamide from food causes cancer in humans. So there's not enough good quality evidence to say that it's going to increase your risk of cancer. So some of the studies, they're not able to accurately measure the amount of acrylamide in people's diets. So really what the take home is that we don't need to avoid acrylamide to have a healthy balanced diet. So if you want to have some barbecued food, or if you accidentally burn your toast a little bit, I mean, I don't like the taste of burnt toast, so I would probably naturally scrape it off or go for a new one, but you can include those foods in your diet. What I would say is sometimes some of those foods can be high in calories. So if weight management is something that we're thinking about, then it might just be sort of going back to basics a little bit and just burying it up in the diet. And when we're thinking about meat, for example, just going back to the bacon, maybe crispy bacon specifically, that doesn't affect your cancer risk, having really crispy bacon, but because the bacon is a processed meat, no matter how it's cooked, it can increase your risk of bowel cancers. So that's something we want to look to reduce.
And Jo, you mentioned weight. Is there any evidence to show that those that are carrying more weight than they should be, or obesity, is negatively correlated with cancer risk?
Yeah, there is quite a strong conclusive evidence to say that those who have a higher intake of high sugar, high fat foods in diet have an increased risk of developing cancers, especially if they are overweight or obese. We don't obviously want to fat shame anybody, and you can be overweight and have an extremely healthy diet. So it's about looking at each individual in front of you. But what we know is with those really high fat diets, it can affect the way that hormone signaling happens in the body. And that is where we're associating sort of the formation of certain types of cancers. So where possible, we want to make sure that we are eating a balanced diet and looking after our weight. But, there is health at every size.
Thanks. So moving from cancer risk to talking about what people should eat if they have cancer. And I imagine this will vary very much by the type of cancer that they've got, but are there any general dietary principles that people could follow?
Yeah, and I think going back to, I'm not going to repeat myself too much, but going back to looking after your gut microbes is the best thing that anybody can do to look after their health with or without cancer, really. And there have been studies that have shown that people who have a more diverse gut microbiome, so the makeup of all of those different microorganisms in the gut, they actually may have a improved treatment outcomes, which is pretty powerful, but also they are looking at certain types of chemotherapies, for example, that can cause significant diarrhea. Those who have a more diverse gut microbiome might actually have less of those side effects. So it's still early days in terms of the research, and it's something that I keep on top of and I'm looking at all the time. But really, eating more plants is the take-home message here. In terms of sort of what to eat otherwise when you've got cancer, really, again, it's going to depend on what side effects you're probably experiencing. So for some people, if appetite is an issue, or they're struggling with their weight and they've been losing weight, we want to be thinking about relaxing your normal eating pattern. It might be eating more little and often. It might be making sure we're having high energy and high protein foods. A lot of people experience fatigue. So we want to be thinking about, okay, how can I feed all my microbes easily? So that's where you might want to be thinking about getting a stock of frozen vegetables or frozen fruits, maybe some frozen meals like the Field Doctor high protein or immunity range, which are excellent. I love them. And really, when we're thinking about sort of, yes, if you need high energy foods, a lot of us will sort of think, okay, well, that means I've got to have loads of fat, I've got to have loads of sugar, you know, because it's a nice, easy way of getting calories. And yes, that can absolutely help. But we also want to try to make sure that we're staying as healthy as possible to support your immune system. So things like, you know, some Greek yogurt, some avocado, lots of olive oil, maybe some coconut milk, some nut butters, nice energy dense foods that contain protein is really important.
And is there such a thing as starving cancer?
Yes, there is, but it's not that simple.
It's never that simple, is it?
Yeah. So it depends. It's something that a dietitian probably will say all the time. But technically, if you were to stop eating completely, starve your whole body, you would starve all of your cancer cells as well as all of your healthy cells of all the nutrition. Yes, that could help in terms of you know, destroying the cancer cells. So but that's obviously not practical. You cannot starve yourself and go through cancer treatment. You would become very malnourished and become very unwell. So taking it a step back, then what can you do? We want to be thinking about, okay, well, I want to make sure that I'm looking after my healthy cells and supporting my healthy cells so that the cancer treatment can target the cancer cells. There's some evidence looking at different types of fasting. So intermittent fasting, you know, it can be a strategy for promoting weight loss, things like insulin sensitivity, reducing blood pressure, and maybe even helping with inflammation in the body. They've also done studies, I think there's a clinical trial ongoing, it may have just finished, results aren't out yet as far as I'm aware, looking at different types of fasting during cancer treatment. And they have early indications have been showing that yes, if you are fasting different types of fasts around the treatment dates, it may actually sensitize those cancer cells to the chemotherapeutic agents, which basically means it might help the drugs do what it needs to do. However, it's also, again, not that simple, because we need to make sure that if you're fasting of any type, whether it is just a prolonged period of fasting between bedtime and breakfast or lunch, or whether it's longer than that, and some of the studies that they're looking at are slightly longer periods, we want to make sure that you can maintain your weight. That's a really, really important thing. Preserving your muscle mass is probably more important than weight, looking after your muscle mass. But also, I have seen in my experience clients who have fasted and then they've arrived for their treatment and their electrolytes have been disturbed. So things like your magnesium, your potassium, for example, if you've been fasting too long, that can go a bit skewiff, and they might then hold off from the treatment until your thing's back in range. So it's just not that simple. If somebody is really, really keen to do a type of fasting, then I would always suggest that you talk to not only your oncology dietitian, but your oncologist, and make sure that they are on board and support what you're doing.
And are there any diets you would not advise that people follow?
Yeah, so it's I don't want to put any ideas into anybody's heads. Don't Google cancer and diet. I think you get over 2 million hits on Google if you do. The two main ones that spring into my head are the alkaline diet, which a lot of my clients ask me about. Essentially, it's a concept, it's based on bad science, because you cannot change your pH within your body by eating foods that are more acid or alkaline. So when we're thinking about proteins, for example, they break down into amino acids in the body. When we eat fats, they break down into fatty acids in the body. Now, that doesn't mean to say that those acid foods are bad for us and are going to turn our body more acid. And you know, we can change the pH of our urine depending on what we're eating, but that doesn't reflect on anywhere else in the body. Essentially, if the pH of our body was not correct, you would probably be in hospital very unwell. So the plus side when I'm thinking about the alkaline diet and the books that I've seen is that they promote lots of plants. So going back to eating lots of plants, so if you've already bought one of those books, then just the take home is maybe look at all the recipes that include lots of plants, forget about the science part of it, because it's not actually legit science.
Great.
The other thing that springs to mind is the ketogenic diet. So I get asked quite a lot about this. So ketogenic diet is essentially where you are taking out all carbohydrates from your diet, so anything that breaks down into sugar. So you've got your obviously sugary foods like cakes, sweets and biscuits, and we kind of want to reduce those anyway. However, the ketogenic diet goes further than that and takes out all of your starchy carbohydrates, so like your pasta, your potatoes, your bread, your rice. It also restricts, if you're doing a full ketogenic diet, it also restricts lots of your fruits and your vegetables. And now we've already know that all of our plant foods, starchy carbohydrates, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, they feed our gut microbes. So if you are reducing all of those in your body to try to starve cancer, you will be potentially, putting your immune system at risk and putting your overall nutritional status at risk. So there is a time and a place where I may recommend the ketogenic diet, and that is very, very specific case where patients may be experiencing seizures if they have a particular type of brain cancer. So that needs to be done under the guidance of a registered dietitian who has had ketogenic diet training.
Thanks, Jo. I thought we could maybe do a little bit of myth busting now. Could you share 3 myths that you commonly hear of or see in your practice? And wonder if you can help me bust those.
Absolutely. I'll start off with sugar just because you kind of just mentioned it with the ketogenic diet.
Yeah, that's great.
Sugar feeding cancer is the most commonly asked question that I have ever seen. And it essentially, sugar, the molecule of glucose, feeds every cell in the body, whether it's a healthy cell or a cancer cell. And as just mentioned, we can't starve a cancer cell without putting our healthy cells at risk. So when it comes to advice for whether you should eat foods that are high in sugar, like cakes, sweets and biscuits, have them if you enjoy them, but just make sure that that's not at the detriment of including all of those lovely plant foods. So sugar feeding cancer, there's a very small element of truth into it that gets blown up into the headlines, but really it's just not that simple. Dairy is the next biggest thing that I get asked about. Is it safe to eat dairy? And the answer is yes, it is. Evidence does not suggest that we should be excluding dairy from our diet. And specifically, if we were outside of the UK where we're able, let me rephrase that. In the UK, we have a very, very tightly regulated dairy industry. So if our cows need antibiotics, that cow and its milk does not enter circulation. So we don't have to worry about, contamination from that side of things. We also are not allowed to put growth hormones into our cattle in the EU. So we know that our dairy is safe to consume. If we were perhaps in somewhere else in the world where they do use growth hormones, I may be saying something different to you. Whether you want to have dairy obviously is up to you, and my job as a dietitian is to support your dietary preferences. So I tend to recommend to people, if they do like dairy but they want to reduce it a little bit, maybe thinking about having some plant-based milks if you want them, but make sure that they have got the same sort of nutrients added to them. So things like your vitamin B12 and iodine, for example, and calcium. So dairy is safe to consume. It actually may play a protective role when we're thinking about colorectal cancer. So that is the take home on dairy. And the third myth that I get asked about, or question that I get asked about, is soya safe to consume? Because there is an old school of thought that it contains estrogen and that may feed cancer. So I should mention actually, all of the information that I'm giving is essentially comes from the World Cancer Research Fund, who runs a continuous update project, which means that they're continuously analysing the global database of evidence. So they summarize that evidence. It gets reviewed by world-renowned cancer experts. So when I come on to say that soya is safe, there will probably be people who have found the evidence that says it is not safe, but there is a body of evidence, a larger body of evidence that we know that says it is. And when we're thinking about why, within soya there is a chemical compound called phytoestrogen that looks under the microscope similar in structure to estrogen, which can feed some cancers. But what we know about phytoestrogen is actually that it can play such a protective role, particularly when we're thinking about reducing risk of recurrence for breast cancer patients. So exactly the type of patients who sometimes avoid the dairy or the soya are the ones who actually could benefit from it for that protective element.
Wow. That was absolutely brilliant. And, you know, I commonly hear about sugar, dairy and soya. So thanks so much for addressing those. I just want to touch a little bit on the role of dietitian in helping people on their cancer journey, and what benefit it is to see a dietitian, and how do people go about seeing a dietitian?
Absolutely. So in most NHS oncology settings, you would be able to access a dietitian if you needed the support. We know that sometimes it is a little bit of a postcode lottery, and that is where companies such as Percy Health are looking to bridge that gap. And essentially, an oncology dietitian has had additional specialist training. They are more aware of the medications, the chemotherapy, immunotherapy, radiotherapy, the side effects associated with those treatments, and some of the other medications that you might have to have whilst you're on cancer treatment. So what does a cancer dietitian do? They take into account everything that's going on medically, and possibly sometimes surgically as well. Really, they can optimize somebody's diet and gut health before, during, or after treatment. So and that might be quite different support depending on where you are in that journey, especially if there's surgery as well involved, so you can optimize somebody's diet for recovering after surgery. A dietitian can help manage different types of side effects, such as fatigue, which is the most commonly reported side effect from cancer treatment. Things like taste changes, poor appetite, weight loss, altered bowel habits, sore mouth. There are lots of different side effects, unfortunately, from some of those medicines, and dietitians can support with that.
And I always love to ask when I have these chats, where can people go and get some more information, reliable resources that you would signpost people to? I know that you've mentioned the World Cancer Research Fund. I don't know, do they share information that's accessible for people outside of healthcare professionals?
Yeah, they do. They've got an interactive matrix actually on their website. So
wow.
I haven't looked at it for a while, so I'm a little bit hazy on that one. But from what I remember, you can go on there and there's lots of kind of like different moving bubbles, and you can kind of hone in on your specific cancer type and be shown the evidence for different things. It's a really useful tool to maybe have a look at. Other useful resources are Cancer Research UK. Charities like Macmillan, and often those cancer specific charities, you know, whether it's prostate cancer, breast cancer, there are some wonderful resources specific to those different types of cancers and the side effects that you may experience. Cancer specific dietitian, whether they are in the NHS or practicing privately, will be wonderful to support you. And there is just sort of touching on the supplement side of things, because that's something that a dietitian will often get asked about. You know, should I take this supplement? Should I take that supplement? Should I take probiotics? There is a wonderful resource on the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Society website called About Herbs, where you can go and look. And I mean, I tend to not recommend going and look, but for some people, if they're taking loads of supplements, it's a place where I go to show them actually the evidence. Essentially, there are lots of different supplements that can interact with chemotherapy, radiotherapy, immunotherapy. And so generally, we don't recommend high doses of antioxidants and other types of supplements whilst you're on treatment, because of those herb drug interactions. And the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Society, it's a bit of a mouthful, website, they show you all of the different side effects. They show you the purported use for those supplements and whether there is actual any evidence for that use. So it's a really useful resource. It's maybe we'll link it in the comments below for people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's always worth highlighting that the nutrition supplement industry is not regulated. So I think there's a lot of claims out there that are made about supplements which isn't regulated or enforced, unlike some of the messages that healthcare professionals give out is
Absolutely.
tightly regulated.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to sort of supplements, if somebody wants to take a multivitamin, for example, I would always recommend that we're not taking one that has more than 100% of the NRV or RDA. So if you're looking at the back of the packet, it's always worth looking. Some of them sometimes contain like 2000% of something. So some of your high street supermarket pharmacy chains do ones that have got 100% and no more. The exception may be if you've got a deficiency in something. So if you've been prescribed a supplement because you're deficient in something, then yes, that should be fine to take. Vitamin D is the one that I always will discuss with any client, not just my oncology client, but any client, because vitamin D plays a key role in supporting your immune system. So making sure that level is optimized is absolutely essential, and we may go over the RDA for that.
Oh, that was a fantastic top tip. And I think so much incredible information that you've shared, Jo, that I think will be of tremendous value to a lot of people. But I would love if you could give one final thought that you'd love to share, or that you'd love to leave everybody with, your sort of top message.
Yeah, I think it's not to focus on diet too much, because when you receive a cancer diagnosis, or when someone you know receives a cancer diagnosis, it's really, really common and normal to focus on food, because that's what you can control at a time when there's so much going on where you can't control things. And really, yes, we do want to maybe look at our diet to see is there things that we can improve, but ultimately food is to be enjoyed. It plays a key role in terms of our quality of life, and in terms of social interactions. So yes, maybe take a bit of a look at what you are eating, but try not to overthink it too much.
Wise words. Thanks, Jo. I've really enjoyed this chat. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sasha.
And we'll make sure that we share the links at the bottom as well when we get this up on YouTube.
Thank you.